Okay, I heard I'm in court deposition and you got interrogatories for me.
Not really. I guess we were just gonna chat about, my transition from recruiter or from travel PTA to recruiter, and then kind of maybe talk some travel tips. Uh, I don't know. What questions do you have for me? I guess too.
So do you have the lead-in questions that you?
I do not.
Okay. Oh, so this is like freehand.
Yeah. So the thing that I guess got all of this started or initiated was I was on a podcast with the PT assistants on Instagram, and I had dropped TravelTax during my interview. So I had reached out on Instagram to make sure that was okay and all kosher and everything, and then David reached out from there and figured we could do a little chat as well. But we do mention TravelTax to probably all of our travelers, just as you guys for a really great resource, since obviously we as recruiters are not or tax professionals by any means. So we always point them towards you guys for your, free question and answers on the phone and consultations and all that happy jazz.
So what's probably the number one question you get as a recruiter?
I would say just in general how to do the taxes. A lot of times when we have new travelers, they don't know what they don't know. And so we're kind of, the main thing is, you got to duplicate your expenses. The 50-mile rule, it's a myth, but it's got to be a non-commutable distance to be considered a traveler versus a local. Just in general, how to kind of set up that duplicating expenses kind of a thing, especially if they're living from home or using a parent's house like I did as a traveler. And then, just making sure that they go home every 30 days. So we kind of just cover the basics of the general rules. But if there's any others that you want to pass along to us, I am absolutely happy to add those to my list of things to tell people.
Well, most travelers, we wish we could get them before they travel because they usually find some sort of mythological statement on the website and hear the 50-mile nonsense. And that's why the very first post on my blog almost a decade ago, when I was just putzing around with nothing else to do, I said, let's start a blog. The very first thing I did was this guy playing whack-a-mole, knocking, like they do in the arcade. And I said, this is how I feel with the 50-mile rule. When can we make it die? When can we put it to death? And it just does not happen. And that's what a lot of them run into. They don't understand that part of a tax home. They think it's where they live. It's not versus where they work. And a lot of travelers too, you got to change their mindsets. We're not just PTs, nurses with our one easy job with W-2. We're now multi-state professionals, and I feel like that's a step in self-awareness, because you're not just little Sally Sue RN anymore. You're Sally Sue that just worked in 4 different states, and you're building a brand. Mm-hmm. And your tax returns are going to reflect that kind of complexity you've chosen to live. And a lot of them sometimes sort of stay in this little cubby corner, and they think, well, why should this be so complicated? And you've chosen a different life now. Because I was a traveler in the 90s. My first year I found in Minnesota, Georgia, South Carolina, and Ohio. So to me, it was a nerdy pleasure, but to most people, it's scary.
Yeah, I remember my first year as a traveler, just I pretty much started from a new grad. I'm from Indiana originally, and I had worked in Indiana as a server
So
during
it's good to be
PTA
a
school.
traveler.
Yeah, and then I went to Alaska to study for boards, and I worked there as a server while I was, just to make some extra money. So I had Indiana and Alaska, and then I went to Oregon and worked for 6 months. So I had Indiana, Alaska, and Oregon.
First credit
Crazy.
state.
It was, that I had to file for. So it was, kind of crazy. And I, against my better judgment, or I guess I didn't maybe know about you guys quite at that time, but I had tried to use, TurboTax, and that was it was crazy. So, I think it got the job done, but to this day, I don't even know. It was a little nuts. So, but I definitely, any of my new travelers that I have, I say, and that was one of the things that I had mentioned on the other podcast as well was, tips in, before you start travel. Therapy is talk to a tax professional first, TravelTax, go to you guys, ask all the questions. We can give you as recruiters, we can give you the main rundown rules, the very general bullet points. But as far as actually initiating that and making that happen and making sure you're in compliance and following all the rules, you guys are the ones to go to make sure that's happening. Am I correct? I guess I had one question for you as well, in that travel tax is different than normal tax. So like, do you need to be like certified to do travel tax, or is it just another niche?
It's more of a niche. Anybody in the US can put a sign out and say, I do taxes. The federal government doesn't, IRS doesn't regulate. They actually got shot down in court when they tried to regulate every preparer. But it's going to come back probably in the next 5 years. Only the states, there's like a handful of states like New York and Oregon that have it. But when you get into this world, you've got not those that are not certified, don't have a license or any sort. But then when you go up the ladder, you've got CPAs, which they're not necessarily tax experts. They're public accounting experts, and they do taxes on the side. Now you have a lot of CPAs that do taxes, don't get me wrong, but it's not that's more like where they generate some bread and butter revenue so they can do what they normally do, because
Right.
it's easy income. Let's just grab our clients. Then I practice off my enrolled agent credentials. That's a federal tax license, and that's how it distinguishes from. So just like the nurse that has to go get another license or be part of a compact or a PT, you've got to be authorized in that state to practice. And my problem is I go out and do recruiter seminars and visit a lot of these agencies. So technically I'm practicing in those states. So I'm better off just working with my federal license than trying to add more alphabet soup in the end of my name. The tax attorneys don't do returns. They just deal in litigation. And then you have in between, I have a master's in taxation. That's a graduate degree in tax. That's sort of, we're considered the nerds in the finance world. Usually if I tell somebody I got an MST, they look at me and they go, oh, you're one of them. But it's various levels, and ultimately it really boils down to how are you willing to hop on the research and your familiarity with the whole multi-state matrix. And then the other thing too, I was a traveler. I've been in this industry for so long that if there's a problem on your W-2, I probably know who to call at your agency. So there's a certain level of advocacy what we're able to do with the traveler that you're not going to get someplace else. I mean, I have some competitors, but they haven't been in the medical world. They haven't been in travel healthcare. Um, and since I've done a lot of litigation work with the agencies and their problems, it is sort of a mutual existence. And I'm not going to say one's bad and the other one's good. Travelers have wrong attitudes just as much as agencies do.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, I feel like that is something we definitely have in common, is that we've both, our kind of second careers, so to say, from being a traveler, right? So, and we both directly work with the travelers, right? So I feel like that's a definite, advantage. And correct me if you feel any different, if you've noticed any different, but like, we know the lingo and the lifestyle, right, that they're living. So we can kind of relate and then, like you said, advocate for them in a way as well. And I definitely found that having been a travel PTA, and I'm, helping to find, PTAs and PTs, OTs, and all of them jobs, when they say a sniff or they don't want to work in a sniff, I know why, and, or, if they want a specific setting or, whatnot, talking productivity and all that kind of stuff in the healthcare world, I can really relate, where a lot of other recruiters may not be able to, or not understand, especially if they get in a sticky situation while they're on contract,
Yeah, in the old days, recruiters were nurses.
Yeah.
The first travel staffing agency was in the 70s, and it was started by a nurse's husband who was already in staffing. So there was sort of a we know what we're doing kind of attitude. They'd hire nurses, and then that sort of phased out. I think when I traveled in the 90s, I occasionally got a recruiter that had a medical background.
Yeah.
But now you see that coming back more. I got a lot of clients that have, because we have such a rush to the door and the exit of the industry. I've got a number of clients that are now working with the agency's clinical liaisons or recruiters or doing site visits.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have noticed too, as I've started, increasing my Instagram presence and whatnot too, is, as I tell people, hey, I'm a recruiter, but I was also a PTA, I know the industry, kind of to gain a level of trust. And I would say probably the number one response is, oh, how do you like being a recruiter? I've been thinking about that. Or how of getting out of the field, kind of a thing. So there's definitely a mass exodus, I think, to an extent of, between nurses and therapists, the whole healthcare industry. I think, everyone's getting burnt out, especially after COVID, most especially after COVID, but just in general, everyone's getting burnt out with the healthcare system and trying to look for those other avenues. But we also spent a lot of money on loans too to get to where we were. So it's kind of a tough situation sometimes to make that transition.
Well, the staffing shortage isn't a shortage anymore, it's a crisis. And if you go to the healthcare staffing conferences with, that's what they're calling it now, because you got, like we said, the rush to the door. They're not retirement age, they're just done with it. I remember last March doing a week's worth of returns. I had 2 nurses tell me they're going into aviation.
Wow.
Yeah, 2 in 1 week. So they're going for the exit door. The retirements have accelerated. You have less enrollment in nursing schools because now nursing, anything health related, whether it's like I was as an RT, PT, it's now considered combat because they saw all of the images of the scars, of the mask, and the burnout. And then the other is the hopscotchers. You've got nurses that finish their bachelor's degree but don't do any bedside. They go straight into the NP. They don't, so they've just basically skipped the bedside.
Yep.
So it's while we were dealing with the shortage, pandemic turned it into the crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things too is, it's like the loans and their return on investment essentially. Going into PTA school personally for me, my goal was PT school, and I didn't end up getting into any PT schools. And then the PTA school I ended up going to in Southern Indiana, University of Evansville, basically fell in my lap. And it was, within a month, I had gone from not having any interviews to interviewing on this, interviewing, getting accepted on the spot, and starting within a couple weeks. So it was a pretty quick turnaround for me. And I was like, okay, well, I guess this is what I'm doing, kind of a thing. And I was like, well, I can always go back and get my bridge program and get my PT that way. And, once I started working in the field, I was like, no, like I have, 60 grand in loans. I don't want to add another 100, just to do more paperwork essentially. Right. So I was like, I kind of like what I'm doing as a PTA. It's, you do the fun part, but I'm also like still have to pay off my current loans, and I don't want to add any more either. So, and the pay doesn't really compare either, so it's not like I'd be able to pay those off more having been a PT versus PTA. So I think that's where a lot of the crisis is too, where, it's just not financially smart at this point,
Mm-hmm. So do you have any other particular questions that are burning in your mind now?
Maybe one of the things is, what do you find is the most, and maybe you get asked this all the time, I'm sure, what is the biggest mistake or things that travelers miss when it comes to doing their taxes, or figuring out tax home, or any of that kind of stuff, dealing with the traveler?
Well, the tax home thing is confusing. We probably, with new travelers, either they know it or don't know it. There's not much in between sometimes. That, and I think we've already touched on it, but it's just a matter of trying to get to them before they travel. And let's be honest, the agencies, for the most part, they're going to give out the form, but the forms are sometimes self-serving. That's why 50 miles, if you throw that question in there, that it doesn't, I call it poor man's compliance, because it doesn't really answer the question. You're getting per diems for lodging and meals? Are you actually incurring lodging and meal expenses away from home? That's the question that should be asked. And tax-free money, I'm earning it. No, you're not earning it. It's a reimbursement. So there's just a whole confusion over how all that works and the concept of per diems. I wish there was a way. Well, of course, that's why we have our TravelTax University and all of these offerings on the website, in order to draw people in and say, hey, you want a tax home consult? Here's the university. Look at our educational items so you can familiarize yourself with this. I mean, we do cross-border Canadian work too, and you want to talk about confusion, they think, well, I'm just going to go hop. And this isn't just medical. This is IT guys, professional sports players, and they think, well, I'm just going to go across the border and work a little bit. You just opened a whole new can of worms, and all the clients work in two nations. So I wish there was a way to get them in there, but of course that's why we put all that together. And it's other non-tax things. You are adopting a new lifestyle, and you got to get a groove in there. You got to think 13 weeks at a time and get into that groove. Yeah. You're going to be sitting around a while waiting for your next gig. I remember I always started like 5 weeks before the end of my 13-week assignment. I called Cynthia up, said, okay, where can I go next? Well, they want to stay there. Well, I don't want to stay here. I'm a traveling man. That's why I got in there. So, I mean, that's really the big ones there. And I've some, you get it, a lot of clients don't realize I'm still at home. I'm just doing this temporarily. I'm just doing a gig. And, in the work environment, you're not there to change anybody. You're just a rent-a-tech or rent-a-nurse. And don't expect you're going to change everybody while you're there.
Right.
Just do your job and enjoy the place. And
Yeah, do your thing. I used to tell myself if it was a bad contract or a bad facility, you can do anything for 3 months. Just keep your head down, get done what needs to be done, and then you can get out of there, and get paid. But yeah, and that's the beauty, I guess, of travel too, is if you don't like it, you can move on. You're not stuck in a contract for a year or 3 years or whatever, kind of a thing, and you can kind of just move on to your next spot. And if one doesn't work out for you, or decide to stay like I did, I ended up in San Diego and liked it here and decided to put down some roots. So here I am.
Well, the other plug here is I think every traveler should go to the Travelers Conference in Vegas at least once in their life. You learn so much about the industry, and not because I'm one of the founders of it or was there from the beginning. It's just what was put together there is 2 days of fantastic knowledge, and being able to go in the exhibit hall and talk to 100 plus staffing agencies. And it's not via internet, it's eye to eye, face to face. And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Because we can be as high tech as we want in this world, but the personal touch is always going to go farther. And that's coming up in 2 months, and there's still room if you want to go. And
I've definitely had it on my list of things to do. I've been meaning to go, and it always sneaks up too late on me. And I already, that 3 months ahead, and I just never looked ahead far enough to get to TravCon. But, it's definitely on my list of to make it there, if obviously, maybe not as a traveler, but as a recruiter now, just to kind of keep a tab on the industry and see what's going on. And I've seen the pictures and the videos, and it looks like a really great time. So
it is.
Yeah. So I guess with TravCon then too, other than, talking to all those, staffing agencies, I know for me, I'd probably be getting overwhelmed, with everyone, because everyone's trying to recruit you, right? You put a ton of recruiters into one room, and it's like a pool of sharks, right? Like kind of a thing. Everybody's trying to get the travelers to come with them. How would you suggest a traveler kind of navigate that?
You mean at the conference?
Yeah.
What would they do there in particular? Well,
yeah.
You got to look at it. You got to look at the agenda first.
That's true. Yeah.
I think the other aspect, you're not a nurse. Initially, when we put the conference together, the biggest complaint was it's all about nurses. Well, that's changed a lot. And I think the advantage for the non-nursing specialties is to be able to go and say, let's just say you're an occupational therapist. You go there and you say, how many OTs have you staffed for the entire year? Well, we staff a lot. What's the number? If it's just to pass it on, if it's about 100, you're in business. Same thing for Pete. There's agencies that really focus on the ancillary therapy side, and it's just not all nurses.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I have heard, I've heard that too, and there's some that are just nurses versus not the allied side, and some that do both or not, or, all of the things. Yeah. Are there, I guess, what are your, other than getting in before you start traveling, what are your biggest tips for travelers that are traveling now that maybe haven't reached out to you guys yet, or aren't working with a travel tax professional? Kind of, what are your biggest tips, or what would you want recruiters to be spreading, knowledge about, I guess?
What kind of gospel does the recruiter should be spreading?
Yes.
Well, okay. Especially in the older days, but even now, your recruiters are sort of like the lifeline when the traveler gets started. Recruiters build brands, because we can't tell you how many times a traveler on Facebook is going to say, go with agency X and you want to talk to Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Professional sports players get elected. It's really interesting to sit on this because we sponsor our local hockey team, and they get to go to the orientations for the employees, the players, and they talk about, we're here to help you build your brand. And a recruiter is building a brand because their name is their brand. They're talked about, and you got two nurses staring at an EKG strip, and they get into the conversation about this, and your name's going to come up. So the more you are the can-do advocate and get into their world and be a part of it, the better your brand. And that's going to, if you got a good brand, you're going to generate more business for yourself, especially if you're on commissions. And some of those won't take as long as others because you've already built that reputation. You're not going to have to explain as much to a traveler. So a lot of new recruiters, because I spend a lot of time with them, they'd come in, they're just like, this is a weird world. But it is that opportunity to literally learn staffing, build your brand, and you can go a much longer way. Even go, if you're on vacation, go visit one of your travelers. I tell travelers to go visit their recruiters and have lunch with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like,
I tell all of ours that are down in San Diego, I'm like, come see us, and Pioneer puts together, meetups and stuff like that too. So it's definitely a community. Definitely a community.
We don't have an official bring your recruiter to work day, like bring your daughter to work, but it would be a good deal,
That'd be good. That'd be fun. Yeah. That'd be awesome. So, like I said kind of earlier, when I'm on the phone with a new traveler and, I'm kind of generally going over the tax situation, obviously I say, go to TravelTax. They're, don't take my word for everything, talk to them. They're the professionals. But in the general rules and the breakdown, 50-mile rule is a myth, right? It's just got to be a non-commutable distance. And then, going back to your tax home for 30 days throughout the calendar year, and then making sure you duplicate your expenses. Is there anything I'm missing as far as kind of the general rules of travel tax or tax with traveling?
Yeah, that's the standard 50-32 spell. 50 miles, it really boils down to whether you have the expenses. The 30 days don't have to be all in one block. They can be all over. And then the duplication, there is also the ones that keep jobs at home. That's sort of like a 2% of the travelers out there. And they don't have to duplicate, but everybody else, for the most part, they're maintaining a sticks and bricks home at home, and they got a place on the road. There's the duplication, and it's a daily question, not a general question, because you're getting a daily per diem. That's the initial part, but then when they start traveling a while, then we get into those limitations, the 1 year rule.
1 year rule.
And
Yeah.
that's where a lot of agencies, there's so many different policies that are trying to be compliant with that rule. But basically, if you think of it, if you got the right concept of a tax home, that it's your regular place of work, it's not where you live, only by exception it is. It's a regular place of work. Well, that makes the 1 year rule makes sense now, because we can't turn this area into our regular place of income. Hence the 1 year rule that puts a block on it. And then there's a 3 year rule. You shouldn't be coming back to the same place 3 years in a row. It's all designed to keep you in motion, not
Gotcha.
be a travel nurse, not an orbit nurse.
So would it be the non-commutable distance then? Because I think this is something that I always traveled far enough away that I guess it didn't matter. But, let's say you're in Sonoma. I did a contract in Sonoma, and then I go take a contract in San Francisco. Is that far enough away, or would that still be within the 1 year that you can only be in that general area for a year?
Well, the best way I look at it is, can you live in the middle and have a commute to both? If you can, you're in the same area, because all you're doing is going pivot and orbit. Just like when you drive through farmland, pivot irrigation systems, they're like this,
Sure, yeah, yep.
You can reach all sorts of places on that pivot.
Okay, gotcha.
So that's how I look at it. And let's be rational about this. You live in Iowa, and all you ever do is work in California for 2.5 years. An IRS agent, and these audits, the IRS agent gets really skeptical, and he goes, well, if all you're going to do work in California, why don't you just move there? And the longer you're there, the more that question has legs. And traveling, come on, I know people just want to travel for money, but it's your one opportunity to go explore, go see the world. Take $5 less so you can go to this town you never go to the rest of your life. It's so enriching.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of thought of it always as like interviews for where I wanted to kind of settle, kind of hop around and see, what you like, where you want to be, what state you want to end up in, and, or, kind of see if the grass is greener on the other side too. If you're, I'm from Indiana. So, my recruiter at one point mentioned, taking a travel contract back in Indiana. And I was like, no, please don't. Like, I don't want to go back. Like, I want to be on the West Coast, please. Like, begging her to find me something, and that's what, taking the hit on the pay, or, doing what you got to do. But, get out of your comfort zone and explore and kind of figure out where you want to go. And maybe home is where you want to end up, but at least you saw what was on the other side so that you don't have those regrets,
Yeah, and if you're in the dating scene, you just expanded the pool,
Absolutely. Hey, I met my boyfriend while I was out in California, and that never would have happened if I was still in the Midwest. So, it is awesome. I think there's actually apps for that now, where that's specifically for travelers to connect, single travelers to connect and whatnot too. So, it's definitely an ever-growing community, but it's a tight community for sure. I've definitely had travelers where, you kind of run into each other. You work in Oregon with them, for a contract, and then they move on, and then you're like, oh, you're only the town across from me now, like we end up kind of in the same area, or, you kind of run into cheap people or people, other travelers that know the travelers that you worked with. It's definitely a small community, feel to it.
Middle 3 assignments, it was like 3 of the same people. We started having potlucks on Friday night, going out and playing tennis together. It's
a really cool, and it takes a certain kind of person to want to and be able to be successful at traveling and being a traveler, right? Jumping into the workplace your contract, hitting the ground running. You maybe get a week of orientation or like kind of a ramp up period to kind of get your bearings. But other than that, they're expecting you to be, on top of it, pulling your full caseload and everything pretty much right away. So it's a different mindset, and, to be able to take that, from one place and then move your whole self to another place, kind of start over again, make those new friends or those new connections, learn that new facility or that new setting that you've always wanted to try. It's nerve-wracking, but exciting. It's kind of exhilarating to some extent too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are there any questions that you have for me as a recruiter or on the recruiter side of things?
Well, I could market. I do recruiter training seminars.
Okay.
And I will be in LA in October, close to you. What part of California are you in?
We are in San Diego.
Yeah, that's just up the road.
Yeah.
But in those sessions, not only for the agency, as I review their compliance documents, and then once we're all happy with how those look, then I come in and do either in-house or Zoom or whatever. I do training sessions for the recruiters, basically walking in through all the tax home per diem multi-state issues that is so common. And it's not only designed to give them a better idea of what's going on, but it's also bolsters the whole compliance workflow from, in the initial intake, onboarding to the assignment. So everybody's on the same page, which, eventually we're going to have another wave of agency audits like we did last decade. So we always want to be prepped for that. But that's a recruiter-sided offering that we do. I don't have any particular questions for you other than what does your recruiter do if they have a questionable tax home status claim? Do you have a compliance manager? Do you take it up to another level, or what's the policy from within?
Well, we have at Pioneer, we do have an awesome compliance department, and they go through everything. Where I forget what the term is, but we're certified compliance, a certified compliance team. So they definitely make sure that, your everything, all your ducks are in a line and everything. But I would say, if we do have a questionable, something and we don't know the answer, I know for sure we always send them to TravelTax. I mean, I hear it all the time throughout our whole office, go talk to TravelTax.com. They can help you answer all your questions, at least from the recruiter side, kind of a thing.
We have quite a lot of agencies, though. A lot of them email me or whatever, even if it's down to one particular client that they just don't know what to, or traveler they don't know what to do with.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I was going to ask a question, but I don't remember what it was. Let's see. What would you say, are there any like mistakes that you feel like travelers make the most? Did you come across?
Yeah, making too many assumptions is probably, that's humanity in general, but we've already talked about a number of them, but probably the other thing they need to be prepped for is most travelers aren't paying attention to retirement. They're not putting aside anything. I mean, if I can get them to $100 while I've got to the pond, they're not drinking much, using the horse analogy. But it is a challenge because if you're going to work with 3-4 different agencies, like a lot of people do, let's just be honest, then you're going to run into their 1 year limitations before we're going to start the matching or make this worthwhile. So at least have a personal individual IRA or Roth on the side that you can participate in. You know, when the younger you are, the more leverage you have with that. Because $6,000 invested when you're 20 versus 40 is going to be a huge difference. And you got to think of your financial picture more holistically than just how much do I make.
Sure. Yeah, I know that was one thing. You know, one of my roommates was a financial nerd, as you like to say, as well. And she actually got me into, you know, I got my Roth IRA, and I've been bad and I haven't contributed to it probably since, but I got it at least started, you know, so that's better than nothing. What about, I just learned about this the other day, actually, through someone else on Instagram, but high yield savings. How would you suggest that if you were gonna, you know, maybe if they didn't have the $3,000 to put into a Roth or something like that at that time, if they're a new grad, what would you say is the best alternative?
A best alternative to a high yield savings now,
or alternative to starting a Roth IRA, you know, an IRA account or savings, you know, retirement kind of thing. If you don't have the funds to put into it initially, what would you say is the best alternative to start saving that money to get to retirement?
It needs to be someplace other than under the pillow or in a low yield, high yield savings. I mean, what are we looking at? Maybe 3%. There are dividends, and I got to be careful because I'm a tax advisor. I'm not an investment advisor, but I've been doing this stuff for so long. There are dividend stocks that pay 5, 6, 7%. One advantage of a Roth IRA is that you can always take out your contributions. So if you're worried about getting the money but want to invest it, one way to shield the earnings, stick it into Roth, let the earnings grow tax-free. And let's say you put 6,000 and you got an emergency and you need 2,000. Well, that first 6,000 you can pull back out tax-free. So in some ways, versus putting it in a traditional, then you're going to get an early withdrawal penalty. So a Roth has a little bit of that flexibility. And if you don't want it in retirement, at least start a brokerage account and start investing in individual mutual funds or securities or whatever. But don't just stick it in and forget about it, because most people are not monitoring investments. The markets change every day. And just because it goes down doesn't mean you gotta be running out, because it's going to go down and it's going to go up. That's how you make your money. You go with the flow.
Sure.
And if it goes down, you can make money while it's going down.
Okay.
So if you find an investment advisor that can keep on top of it, still communicate, because this is your money, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your checking account, watch your investment account just as much.
Yeah. I gotta plug my computer in really quick. It came unplugged.
I've got about 9 more minutes.
Okay, I got one more question. I remember the question I was gonna ask you. As far as audits go, because I know that's the scary, you know, scary term when it comes to travelers and then, you know, taxes. What would you say is the percentage of travelers that end up getting audited at the end of the day? And then kind of, you know, I know, you know, as a traveler, I probably didn't follow all of the rules 100%. I did my best by all means, but you know, sometimes maybe you can't make it that full 30 days and I maybe only made it 20 days back to my tax home or something, you know, kind of a thing. Just with time off and, you know, like you said, planning your 3 months ahead and all of that. But kind of how many, you know, end up getting in maybe not in trouble with audits, but end up getting audited as a traveler versus just a normal healthcare professional?
Well, there's a number of ways to answer that. Probably the biggest picture is you are in an industry that has a history and reputation. Construction industry is the same way. So historically, healthcare staffing has always been one of those highly audited industries. Now, in the last 6 years, the IRS lost a window for these audits when tax reform came because job expenses were no longer deductible. So the majority of the traveler audits were triggered before 2018 by travelers claiming a lot of job expenses. Then they could do that, then they can go straight into getting agency information, etc. Well, that got suspended in 2018. It's going to come back in 2016. However, the agencies, we've had the American Mobile Supreme Court case. We've had other court cases involving agencies and wage recharacterization. And I was even in a 16-hour deposition in the Orange Supreme Court over an agency suing an agency for non-compliance in the tax world. It's not like this stuff is now hiding. Our industry is constantly under radar. So to answer the question, how often are the audits? They haven't been that much lately because the IRS hasn't had the staff. We've had the pandemic and we've had the new tax reform, but now the IRS has got their staff back. Going forward, it's not going to be as dry as it used to. And the other thing is if you try to look around and find a traveler who's been audited, the problem is the IRS waits about 2 years before they do that. And by that time, the traveler doesn't travel anymore. So if you go to Facebook, I love the question, how many of you have ever been audited? And I think, how many of you have been here more than 2 years? Because you're just not going to hear about it. But percentage-wise, I'm going to say yes, it's less than 1%, but that's not your ticket to non-compliance.
Sure. Oh, of course, of course.
Somebody else has to pay taxes if you're milking the system, so to speak.
Sure. No, absolutely. So if a traveler does get a notice that they're going to be audited, what would you say is what would be the first thing they would do? Because if I got it, I would probably start to panic and be like, oh no, what did I do? Am I going to be in trouble? I don't know. What would you say is the first thing that they should do? Should they reach out to you guys? What's the next step once you get that notice?
Well, you probably want to talk to the person that did your return.
Okay.
That's the best place to start. If they don't want to deal with it, yeah, bring it to us. And we do audit representation. That's not a problem. Now, what's not an audit is a math thing. You get a notice that says, well, we see this other document. Well, that's just a matter of the IRS having one thing and you not having it, or even clarifying something you have, they don't. When it comes to the actual tax law and whether or not you had your tax residence, whatever, well, you definitely want to find somebody who's going to represent you in that, whether it's the person that put the return together or not. And, we still have those random nondescript audits because the IRS is looking at your agency. And they will audit 30 plus or more just as evidence gathering. But if it's just a simple math thing, just make sure you got the same records the IRS does. But if it's involving reimbursements and that kind of a thing, get it to your preparer that did it. And if they can't handle it, well, we're here. There's, a handful of other people nationwide that know how to deal with that. But, you know, the first thing I'm going to be looking for, if it is involving your per diems and all, is I want your contracts, which we require of all of our tax prep clients anyway. Then I want some proof that you actually pay for housing.
Yeah.
And we tell all of our clients, we want you to keep that. We make them send the contracts to us, but they need to be keeping proof to substantiate that per diem. If you got a housing, well, where's the proof that you spent it? Not all of it. You don't have to spend all of it, but you have to have a daily expense for the lodging that you got reimbursed for.
Okay. And then would you suggest that to be like a paper trail, or like
Electronic.
Venmo work or electronic work, like anything that just shows that you paid? Okay. Because I know for a while I was sending my mom physical checks, and then we kind of moved to Venmo, for rent kind of a thing. So
don't do cash.
Okay. No cash.
No.
Got to be a paper trail.
Yeah, because in, cash economy, it's always your word against somebody else's.
Sure. Anything else that you want, recruiters to know when they're talking to travelers about taxes, or anything like that? Any last minute tips or?
Well, I would love all the recruiters to come to our website and join the university. But ask your own questions. I mean, look at your contracts that you put out. What in there can create a tax question? How do you pay these per diems? So that you can defend and answer the questions that the travelers are going to have. If you want to go to the layman's guide, go to publication 463. That's the IRS layman's guide. The first 8 pages deal with temporary jobs and tax home issues. And if you have problems sleeping, just read 1 page a night, and you'll solve 8 days of Sominex. But that's sort of the layman's guide to all this. It doesn't get into court cases and all the fine detail, but at least gives you a broader understanding.
Okay. Awesome. Well, it's been so great to chat with you. As a traveler, I've seen all of your clips and TravelTax, promotions and TravCon and all of that kind of stuff. So it's definitely an honor to chat with you in person today. And I really appreciate you taking your time to chat with me as well.
All right. Well, you have this is today, Thursday. Have a good weekend.
Thursday. Thank you so much. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.